Hi, I'm Roxana Parra, your host at Mind Your Mind podcast, a reflective and practical space for frontline workers from diverse care and helping professions, working, advocating, or supporting others, no matter your level of experience. In Mind Your Mind, we believe that wanting to help others is great, but knowing how to do it while continuing taking care of yourself is even better. In this podcast, you will hear from experienced psychotherapists, community workers, clinical supervisors, and thinkers promoting well-being, offering you a reflective material to work from, a psychologically informed viewpoint, and giving you tips and practical ideas to develop your personally meaningful self-care strategy. If you want to enhance your practice, avoid secondary traumatization and burnout, and maintain a sense of purpose and fulfillment while you're doing your job, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Roxana Parra Sepúlveda, and I will be your host in the Mind Your Mind podcast. Since I arrived in the UK, I started working doing psychotherapy for refugees fleeing situations of war or asylum seekers. Then I continued to coordinate and manage therapeutic services over several years, supporting survivors of abuse and trauma. While doing that, I trained as a clinical supervisor, and soon after, I started to do supervision for non-clinicians as well as for counselors and psychotherapists. I call those sessions now well-being sessions. Through this work, I started to see the impact of working with the pain and the suffering of others in myself and the professionals I was supporting. I will be meeting with you here in the Mind Your Mind podcast twice a month to talk about diverse topics of interest to connect with the well-being of the body, the mind, and your spirituality as well. I will be talking with friends and colleagues that will help us to reflect based in the theoretical understanding of the impact of trauma on the brain, the attachment theory, the psychoeducation on trauma and trauma response, and well-being in practice, with tips and information on how to create your own support system and personally meaningful well-being strategy. I want to create a wave that puts on the table a reflective space for your work, and also want to support you to create your own meaningful well-being strategy so you can continue doing what you love while taking care of yourself as well. In preparation of this podcast, I was thinking about those in helping and caring professions, people that helps people in diverse roles, and the list is really long. First, naturally, I tend to think about psychotherapists and counselors, my peers, but also advisors, clinical supervisors, IDVAs, ISVAs, interpreters, advocates, humanitarian workers, social workers, administrators, people that are working within the NHS force, the police force, people that works in law, the lawyers that are listening so many terrific stories as well. And so I am aware that this list is very long, that there are many people in different capacities helping others and being witness of the suffering of others. And I am aware that many of you out there are holding diverse roles, supporting those surviving traumatic experiences, and that I have not mentioned in this list. So what is inspiring me is a say by Babette Rothschild that says, desperate clients cannot be helped by desperate therapists. Everyone working in caring or helping professions navigates the consequences of witnessing stories of trauma and emotional or physical pain while working within the limitations of their own self, their roles, and their organizations. The persistent exposure to the emotional and cognitive impact of supporting others can have a direct impact in their resilience, in their capacity to be empathic, and continue working from a place of compassion and fulfillment. Johnson in 1992 said, in the process of helping others, we need to ensure not to lose ourselves in the other's experience. When we are supporting people and you are persistently thinking about their needs, it's very easy to stop thinking about your own needs and lose sight of yourself and what is good for you. But what is compassion fatigue, and how do we go from thriving in our job to burnout? And this is something that we can see particularly within the helping professions and roles. So we are human. And I know that's a very, very obvious statement, right? But people helping people are vulnerable to experience disruptions in the way they see the world, themselves, and others, starting from emotional exhaustion to progressive developing symptoms of vicarious traumatization or secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. These changes in the worker's emotional, cognitive, or behavioral levels are adaptive and are expected to be some changes there. But also, these changes have a cumulative effect that can be negative and detrimental for their well-being. So the impact will be in almost all aspects of the worker's life. It is just natural to have an emotional reaction to the stories you are listening to or situations you are witnessing as well. So the understanding and acknowledgement of that very, very personal reaction that you will have can support your resilience. Let me tell you some definitions as well. So we have stress, and stress is not trauma. Stress and trauma are two different things. And we all can experience stress. People helping people from any level of expertise can be stressed when their work is experienced as demanding, challenging, or weighty in terms of their responsibility. So I'm sure you all have been in that place where your to-do list become longer and longer and longer. And now we are seeing that even before the pandemic, services were in demand, especially mental health services were in demand. And now every single service out there are experiencing long waiting times. And that context, that environment in which we are working is persistently stressful. But there are other elements of this as well. There is the aspect of the emotional exhaustion. And the emotional exhaustion will occur when you feel overloaded, hopeless, or weighed down from listening to painful stories. Stories of interpersonal violence, of suffering and pain. The emotional exhaustion then comes with this consistent need that you have to be out there supporting others and being empathic, available, emotionally available for the other person, ready to listen, ready to respond empathically and sympathetic to their needs. That has a demand, an emotional demand in yourself. And it's just natural that sometimes you will feel emotionally exhausted. But the next level of this is the vicarious traumatization, which is a manifestation of emotional exhaustion and refers to the negative impact, cognitive as well as emotional, on your sense of security from hearing the horrific stories of trauma survivors. This is a sign that a client's history is having a more extreme impact on the worker's mind in a way. So a change in perception about the nature of the world, about being safe in the world, and about being able to control one's destiny is the hallmark of vicarious traumatization. And Perlman was talking about this for the first time in 1995. So vicarious traumatization comes with a change in your perception. There is a cognitive element to vicarious traumatization in which you will start to see the world in a different way from influence by listening so many stories of pain and suffering. A secondary trauma stress disorder was described by Figley in 1995, and it's the next level. And it's when the helping professional is experiencing vicarious traumatization and also have symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. This list of symptoms can be very long, but will touch, for example, in your sleeping patterns, in your levels of anxiety, and your capacity to be calm and to be in a place where you can manage that anxiety, and you can experience a variety of symptoms that will be impacting you emotionally, cognitively, and in the way that you behave. So what you feel, what you think, and what you do. Esther Moray talks about moral injury and has been used to describe the psychological effects of bearing witness to the aftermath of violence and human carnage. This was explained like this by Liz in 2009, and encompasses witnessing human suffering or failing to prevent outcomes which transgress deeply held beliefs. Moral injury, it is a manifestation of moral distress. The symptoms of moral injury are strongly linked to feelings of guilt and shame and can manifest as social isolation and emotional numbing. So it's natural that your system, your brain will try to make sense of all what you're listening every day. And in that process, sometimes we'll try to avoid feeling the pain of what you're listening. And in that way, you can become numb or may start to develop all sorts of symptoms that will be manifesting in the long term. And I think this is very important to remember, that the move from emotional exhaustion to vicarious traumatization, secondary trauma, the elements of moral injury, and to end in burnout is a long process and is a cumulative process. All those coping mechanisms that you have developed to avoid the pain sometimes can become detrimental towards yourself. That's why it's important to think about a self-care strategy. So the ultimate point of this escalation of this continuum is the burnout, which is understood as a cumulative process that can result from vicarious traumatization when a therapist is constantly exposed to traumatic material that cannot be assimilated or worked through. This was described by McCann and Perelman in 1990. And notice that I'm talking here about therapists, but it can be anybody. So the point here of burnout is that the amount of material that you are working with is so much that you cannot get to process it, assimilate it. So your brain cannot make fast enough sense of all what you are witnessing and experiencing. And that is when we get to the point of burnout. So here I am with Mind Your Mind, wanting to be part of the solution and support you in the prevention from the potentially negative effects of your job on your well-being. Knowing more about the impact of working with trauma and distress and finding the way to have a personally meaningful self-care strategy will help you not only to enhance your practice, but also to manage anxiety, increase your resilience, and maintain a sense of purpose in your life, which is essential. This is an invitation to understand more about the impact of your stressful job, and most importantly, to start to think about your own needs. I know that people working in the helping profession and supporting others are very, very committed, moved from the suffering of others, and that can take care of themselves sometimes as something that is selfish or not appropriate, or even being experienced with a lot of guilt. So here I want to tell you about this airplane analogy. When you are on an airplane about to start a flight, and you will get the debrief saying that if there is a problem, there will be an oxygen mask falling that you have to put on yourself first before helping others. And that's what we are doing here. The Mind Your Mind podcast will be your oxygen mask, giving you information, tips, and ideas. So please share this with your friends and colleagues, and let's move into an environment in which to be selfish is kind. So please, when you share the podcast, use the hashtag selfish is kind, and let me know about your thoughts, what your roles are. I really want to know about that. Please let me know by connecting with the Instagram Mind Your Mind podcast. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you for being there and listening today in our first episode of the Mind Your Mind podcast. And I shall be talking to you very soon. Bye.